Welcome to our Zonta Says Now Intercontinental think tank, members and friends alike. Please tell us where you are in the world in the chat. Don't forget to include your city, state, and country. Our topic today, conversation, the effects of climate change through the lens of women's health. Today's think tank is hosted by Zonta USA Caucus Think Tank Committee in conjunction with our Intercontinental campaign, Zonta Says Now to Gender Equal Climate Justice. Before we begin, we would like to cover some housekeeping. Please use the chat line to ask questions and make comments. Use welcoming and inclusive language. Avoid judgment, criticism, and hateful comments. Ask short, succinct questions, and answer questions or comments respectfully. We will use breakout rooms during the presentation and welcome your contributions. Lastly, we are honored so many of you were able to make it today. However, due to the large volume of attendees, it would be appreciated if you could please turn off your video. This will help avoid any technical issues. Also, please mute your microphones out of courtesy for the speakers. Thank you. This is our journey today. To get us all on the same page, we'll give an overview of how women's health is affected in the context of climate change. We will also engage our voices in breakout sessions while exploring how to have a conversation about climate justice through the lens of women's health. Our Zonta USA and Intercontinental think tank team today, here on display for you. Zonta Says Now seeks climate justice for women and girls. We want women to be able to prevent, prepare for, respond, and recover from the impacts of climate change on the same basis as men. We do this by taking gender equal climate action locally, nationally, and internationally. Here's how it breaks down. Over to you, Julie.
Thank you, Patricia. Climate change and social justice equals climate justice, and this is how it occurs. Climate change affects weather by increasing the frequency and intensity of weather patterns. Seasonal weather patterns have now become year-round weather patterns. Social justice issues include health, safety, loss, disease, food and water insecurity, and poverty. These issues are ones that Zontians around the world have been trying to reduce. Climate change increases these issues. How can we advocate for a healthier planet for all? Let's learn some more. How can Zontians help? Let's look at the 6 pillars of climate justice. There are 2 areas where Zontians are typically focused and can continue the work they do if climate projects are not within their comfort zone. We sometimes hear Zontians say, we're not an environmental organization. And this is true. However, we know that social injustice worsens with climate change. Zontians and our guests here today can help the planet and each other through efforts in the 2 areas circled in red. Social, racial, and environmental justice. We can be influencers by having a conversation with others about this pillar. Advocate in your local, your state, your region, or nation. Join Fast Action Friday if you're a resident of the United States. And that's through the Zonta USA Caucus. This is an advocacy effort for bipartisan efforts from the federal government. Number 2 is community resilience and adaptation. Over the past 2 years, we have discussed disaster preparation for individuals and communities. Community resilience and adaptation are areas where our clubs can focus, or anyone actually. So here's 2 ideas that you can maybe get involved in. Asking leaders in your community Where is the cooling shelter during extreme heat days? This is to help those without air conditioning. And maybe a service project to supply feminine hygiene products to evacuation shelter teams, or finding out what communities in your area have period poverty. Let's learn more. Over to you, Angela.
Thank you, Julie. So here we are on today's journey, and we will continue to look at the impacts of what happens and changes for women's climate health. Next slide. Climate change and women's health. We have previously reviewed how climate change worsens our weather patterns and social justice issues. Women, men, and children are all vulnerable. We need to focus on women. We need to find that there are numerous areas of health that affect women more than men, or affect only women. Daniela, would you like to explain this to us, please?
I would, thank you, Angela. So here are some additional health concerns. Increased pollution causes a host of issues for women and children, as you can see by the second box. Airborne allergens increase allergies, asthma, and girls are affected by asthma more than boys. Then outdoor air pollutants, such as smoke, ozone, and particulate matter, increases respiratory disease and worsens cardiovascular disease. We also have to worry about ticks and mosquitoes, which are more widespread geographically, putting more people at risk. Increased flooding and rising sea levels increases the incidence of waterborne diseases, infections from pathogens, and elevates the risk of pregnancy loss and death. Rising ambient temperatures increase rates of mental health-related emergency department visits, and climate change, such as prolonged heat, also raises stress and anxiety, leading to violence. Higher mortality during extreme weather disasters then can occur. Next slide, please. So we can see that climate change affects both women's health and well-being and safety. As shown by a multi-study, climate change has already led to a dramatic increase in deaths and injuries from extreme weather events, greater food insecurity, and an increase of infectious disease. These include waterborne diseases such as cholera and vector-borne diseases spread by insects, for instance, mosquitoes, and that brings out diseases such as malaria. Data also shows that disasters are more life-threatening to women than men due to the structural gender inequalities. Examples of this are financial insecurity if the women of the household do not have access to the family money, domestic violence that worsens due to heat, and the need for child and elder care that often rests on women's shoulders, which endangers them with severe weather like flooding and displacement. Back to you, Angela.
Thank you, Daniela. This is the map that was referenced on the other page from the Carbon Brief website. And this website is very interesting because it is interactive. But as you look at the North America, South America aspects, you'll see that there are orange, purple, and then gray symbols. We'll also notice the orange are the women and the purple are the males. And males are more affected by vector, and you can't see under behind there, and also they have a higher case of suicide. They have reactions to temperature streaks, river flooding, and death by injury from extreme weather. But for the women, we also face food insecurity, death and injury from extreme weather, poor reproductive and maternal health, and both are equally affected in mental health. Bonnie?
Thanks, Angela. Next slide. Today's cost to our health has many forms. Like poverty, by 2050, climate change is expected to cause 158 million more women and girls to live in poverty and 236 million more women to go hungry. There are also safety effects through displacement. 80% of people displaced by climate change are women or girls who then face higher risks of poverty, violence, unintended pregnancy, and human trafficking as they migrate or move to safer locations. There are also economic costs. The economic inequality between women and men remains one of the greatest threats to women's health. Female heads of households can lose up to 8% more income due to heat stress and 3% due to floods. There are also mental health and well-being effects. Climate anxiety prevents us from talking about it or taking action, which affects the mental health and well-being of women and children. Next, we'll see a video where pediatrician Deborah Hendrickson, author of The Air They Breathe, talks about why climate conversations are necessary to protect us and our future generations.
One moment, please. Trying to get to it. Sorry. Bear with me a second. Excuse me one second.
Their fears about the effects of global warming, most notably Greta Thunberg, who as a teenager in 2018 demanded the world take action against the climate crisis. What unique perspective do you think children bring to the climate crisis conversation?
Well, one of the reasons they're so at risk, of course, is just because of their age. They're going to have a lot more years in front of them. It is a moral crisis for that reason, because the most powerful people on earth have made decisions that have handed off this problem to the youngest people who had nothing to do with causing this crisis issue.
Now? Okay. All right. So this video is talking about climate change. We're going to improve advocacy and action through conversation and how you can do that. Let's watch this video from the Action for the Climate Emergency to learn more about having the climate conversation. Back over to you, Julie.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and play the video.
Talking about climate change can be tough. I mean, it's not like something you can just casually bring up in conversation. But it's such a big, important topic, we can't just ignore it. And while you can't fix climate change all by yourself, you do have the power to affect the people in your life. So let's talk more about climate change. Here's how. First, think about all the things you want to say about climate change, and don't say them. Really. You see, if you just start going off on how bad climate change is, people are probably going to shut down. They may feel attacked and put up their guard. It doesn't matter how eloquent your words are. If the other person's not listening, there's no point. So here's the secret to talking about climate change. Listen. Listen to the other person. I know it sounds weird, but it's the most important part. You may think the goal is to convince the other person of your perspective, but that's going about it all wrong. The goal is just to have an actual conversation, and that only happens when people listen. So, how do you start? First of all, don't ambush people. Get permission first. If they're busy, no need to force it. Just try again another time. Distractions make talking hard, so it's okay to ask to shut devices off. Once you have their attention, start with a question about climate change. Remember to make it about them, not you. Ask about their thoughts and their perspective. When they start speaking, you have one job: just listen. Resist any urge to respond right away. And whatever you do, don't interrupt. This might be the hardest part, especially if you have strong feelings or if the other person is saying something that you disagree with. But trust me on this. Just listen and be open to what they're saying. Now, if the other person doesn't say much, that doesn't mean you can go, okay, they're done, my turn. It's not your turn until you learn something about the other person. So encourage them to say more by asking follow-up questions. Ask about personal experiences. No need to go into science or politics. Reflect back what you hear them say. Repeating and referring to their words lets them know that you are listening, that you care about their point of view. This makes them feel valued and safe. When you earn their trust, they will be more willing to open up and listen to you. So, after they've shared their perspective, then ask if you can tell them about yours. Okay, now it's your turn. What will you say? Remember, the point is not to convince the other person of anything. If you try to do that, they may become defensive and stop listening. Just share what you personally think about climate change. You may not be a climate expert, but you are the expert on yourself. So, tell your story. When did you start caring about climate change? What worries you the most? After you're done talking, ask what they think. Bring it back to them. And, you guessed it, listen. That's what a conversation is. A two-way exchange of ideas. Go back and forth for as long as it feels right. Learn from one another. At the end, thank them for talking and say what you learned from them. This is important. Ending on a positive note makes it more likely that this conversation will happen again. You see, one little chat may not change anyone's life, but it opens the door to more climate conversations in the future. And that's how you build trust. Get others caring about climate change and make a long-term impact. You may be surprised how much you learn in the process too. So, what are you waiting for? Talk to someone about climate change. It may be one of the most important things you do.
Julie, you're muted.
I just unmuted, thank you. So we're going to talk about advocacy and action through conversation. The video was a great lead in to questions. Here are two, why and how. I'm going to talk about why. Why ask questions. So asking questions, this is an important skill, but it needs to feel comfortable and safe, as you saw in the video. Conversations become more rich, thoughtful, and empowering when we ask questions. Over the past year or so, I have listened to many conversations with the intention to understand the dynamics of asking questions and the negative consequences that I had heard that I feel is important to hear today, because sometimes we don't think about this. And it took me a while to really tap into what I was hearing. And that was the conversation sometimes ended abruptly, or the questioner was dismissed, like, don't worry about that, or I've got it, or things like that. Or the person asking the question was ignored, or negative emotions arose. And we do see this often in conversation. But let me ask you, don't we all deserve honesty and respect when inquiring with questions? So why ask questions? These 4 reasons I came up with, but if you have any more why ask question reasons to empower each other today, put them in the chat. We'd love to hear your voice that way. So the 4 I have is engage our minds, sharpen our listening skills, exercise curiosity, and improve decision making. So Angela, you're monitoring the chat. And before I throw it over to you, do we have any extras?
Why ask? We don't know everything was one comment that was made, and we're going to discuss that when we get into the how portion, because we
Nice.
don't have to know everything.
Right.
Bobby says to learn objectives, then we can find answers, which is exactly what we've been doing. One of the other chats earlier was, how do we talk about climate within our clubs? Because we have mixed personalities within our clubs.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to throw it to you then, Angela. Those were excellent ideas.
Thank you, Julie. So then I get to talk about how. I personally have found if you take a very informal chat approach, it's been well received, and the conversations will actually grow organically. For me, one of the first things to do is you start with the heart. You're chatting with another person who also has a beating heart. So stay with them. It's critical that you kind of learn where they are and how they get their information. Make it real. Not long ago, I was in North Carolina and a woman made the comment on the humidity and how hot it was. And we were at a greenhouse and I said, I know my grow line, my heat line in Kentucky's just raised up to 7. So now I get new plants. And she was shocked. She said she had no idea. What did I mean about the heat line? Which then allowed me to go into the conversation. We talked about the fact that Georgia's now producing oranges. And she said, I had no idea. But it fed her enough information to have more questions. That's how I make it real. You focus on personal solutions and personal benefits. For me, it was I get to buy new plants. You inspire and empower. When we got to talking, I asked her where she had heard a few items on climate. And I said, where did you hear this? On Fox. And I said, oh, I had missed that the last time I was on Fox. Who plays it? Is it brought up regularly? I said, I've been noticing on the other network. And again, it just flowed through to I'll start to pay more attention. And those are the ways that you can be thoughtful when talking about climate. But be careful to stay above the fray and don't get caught in a trap of arguing or refuting false information. She shared information which I knew to be false, which was why I asked, where do you get this? Where do you get your information? Which led to a whole different angle in the conversation. Julie, there we go, the rabbit hole. All of us have found ourselves in rabbit holes. And a lot of time, rabbit holes will take on a life of their own when we feel like we have to have all the answers. My answer to that is generally, wow, I hadn't really considered that question. I'll have to ponder on that a while. But when you are having conversations, not only do you avoid the rabbit hole, but you need to pay attention to trigger words. We all have people that when you say climate change, you watch their eyes glaze over. They check out, or they become very combative with their verbiage. So just being mindful of the trigger words that may happen, and then you can respond to them as to, oh, I'm sorry, I feel like I've offended you. I didn't mean to. Those were just the words I use. Julie? That's still me, yes. So now we're going to move forward. We're going to have a open group discussion. Or no, I'm sorry, our breakout session. So we'll do the breakout session next. The questions today are, what is the cost of climate change to our health? And what are the costs to our future generations?
Thank you, Angela. All right, everybody, we're going to go into breakout rooms. So we have a great big audience. This is so wonderful. Now, because of the way the breakout rooms work, we're going to be randomly assigned. So our USA caucus team should be, one person should be in each one, but we have our international work group here today too. So if you are in a breakout room and you're used to helping get things going, please do, and take a few notes and let us know at the end, a brief sentence or two, what you learned. So let me go ahead and put you all in breakout rooms. And here we go. So watch on your screen to enter or join the room. That's the little blue join button you'll see. Here we go. right, for those of you who are still on, if you want to have a conversation with me while the others are in breakout rooms, that would be wonderful. You can unmute and we can talk about the cost to our health and our future generations when it comes to the subject of climate change. So if you are still on with me, you're certainly welcome to unmute and have a chat about it. So I have Monica, Anja, Bunmi, and Angela Campos with me if you want to unmute and chat about it. Oh, okay, Angela, no worries. I got your chat. So for those of you who are here, I will talk a little bit about the cost to our health. We learned, oh, Boonmi, thank you for unmuting. Oh, welcome, welcome. So let me throw it to you. What do you, and you, where do you live? Where are you from, Boonmi?
I'm in Gastonia, North Carolina.
Mhm.
I'm Teresa Harris's friend,
Oh,
and
nice.
she's been talking to me about Zonta for a while.
Mhm.
She's tried to link me up to different chapters, but there's none that I could find around me. So this is my first time joining. I'm happy to be here.
Wonderful.
I don't know much about all you've been saying. I'm relatively new to understand. I'm aware of some climate issues, but I've never really thought about how it affects women specifically. So I'm glad to be learning.
Wonderful. And Diane, I see that you're on. If you want to unmute and chat with us. Boonmi, welcome. Welcome to what Zonta is all about. We empower women through service and advocacy and education, and we are proud of that. This is a recent campaign, the last 3 years, Zonta says now, to gender equal climate action, which is gender justice or climate justice. So we have been going with these kind of think tank presentations for a few years. And this year we're working on how to empower women economically. And so we're starting with how it's costing women and their families more money based on the health consequences of climate change. And women around the world and in the US can't afford that. We need to, it's less expensive to help work on climate action than it is to let it affect us, our health, our livelihoods, our homes. And so I would like to hear what you have to say if you've seen any or experienced any friends or family or neighbors or people that you know that don't live near you that have had effects from climate change that have affected their health or their livelihoods. So if you or Diane or if Monica wants to unmute, want to talk about that?
Well, of course, the harsh weather has.
Diane, you froze. I'm so sorry. You'll be back in a moment. Well, Bunmi, you must be seeing heat, a lot of heat, more heat days, more intense
Oh,
heat.
yes. Oh, yes. The weather, it's been much more difficult to be outside. This last couple of summers, it's almost like, and it's draining. If you're outside, even for a few minutes, you can feel yourself being tired more quickly, and sometimes it's difficult to decide. My daughter gardens. Sometimes it's difficult for her to know when to plant things, and the weather changes in ways she didn't expect. So sometimes she doesn't get the amount of produce she expected when she expected it. So a lot of things are not as predictable, and we find ourselves turning on the air purifier more, and dehumidifier more and all that. So yes, but we do feel it. Yes.
Diane, did you want to tell us again what you were saying, because you had frozen? For some reason I can't hear you. It is unmuted, so I'm not sure why. Well, yeah, I guess we can't hear you, and I wish we could. I wish we really could. You could put in the chat what you were saying. I would like to respond to Bunmi. Tell me how to pronounce your name properly so I don't continue to.
You're close, Bunmi.
Bunmi?
Bunmi,
Okay.
yes.
Bunmi, you just expressed the answer that of both questions. Diane says harsh weather, definitely. So the fact that the heat is making it nearly impossible to be outside, and then your daughter, which is a future generation, is not getting as much produce because of the heat. This is a real time example of what we're facing and how climate change is making things worse. So increasing your humidifier and your other electronics to keep it cooler and less humid is costing you money. Being out there in the heat can make us sick. I mean, if we're out too long, we can get heat exhaustion. There's all kinds of heat related issues that women can get. And our future generations, if you know anyone who's pregnant, heat is damaging to pregnancy if you're out too long. So it's really hard on the baby and the mother. Finding affordable housing, Diane, absolutely. And housing that has air conditioning if you're in a hot area, which I don't know if you watched the weather this year, the national weather. Oh my gosh, the heat was everywhere. So everyone was affected. So yeah, affordable housing, and that's a real problem in my area too. So what else can you consider that is, let's move to this. We have about 2 more minutes. How about we talk about how having the conversation might be something you might consider doing more with local legislators, with friends, or your community leaders. What do you think? Let's see. 110 degrees in Southern California yesterday. That's hot. Diane, I can hear you typing. Try talking. Let's hear you.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
Oh, I changed the, it's important to have the conversation. I wish everybody could just keep moments of this crisis in mind and go about their daily lives, but never forgetting this overwhelming challenge that we're facing. And then now with elections around the corner, to be sure to vote for climate action politicians. It's so vital. And maybe even go to meetings and to town councils and speak up. What are you doing? I live in the upstate Adirondacks, which is like paradise, literally paradise. But what's happening here is climate migrants might be drawn to my area. But now what might have been affordable housing is being bought up and used as holiday rentals.
Oh, that's a
instead
problem.
of having the houses available for families that need to relocate. It's such a challenge. It's this notion of somehow making money all the time in terms of building community. We need workers, we need children in schools. Our schools are suffering in upstate Adirondacks, believe it or not. They need to come together in some closing because there's not enough kids there using the schools. I mean, it's all so interconnected. But I've always felt that this climate is an overwhelming cloud of future doom that maybe makes people so depressed without even thinking about it that they just go along with what's current instead of taking the actions that I think Zonta promotes.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, absolutely. I really like what you had to say, and it really complements what Bunmi was saying too. Bunmi talked about on the chat, she said insurance rates doubled or people are unable to get insurance in certain parts of the country. That is just another factor that we're all facing. Both of you really wonderfully pointed out these various factors, and that does affect the younger generations trying to buy their first home. And it is all interconnected. I totally agree. We have Helen on also, if Helen wants to talk about the cost to our health and future generations. Helen, are you interested in unmuting for a moment? And we have about a minute and a half left before we go back to the big group.
You're talking to me. I think I was on another group and then I came into this group. I think, is this group 2 or is this another group?
This is the group that never went to a breakout room.
Okay. What I was talking about with the other group was that I'm from New Zealand. Here we're having a bipartisan inquiry into climate adaptation, actually. The government has decided to look at the holistic issue of how my country, New Zealand, is going to deal with managed retreat and building resilience, especially in coastal areas because of sea level rise and the need for flood protection. And it's really interesting. I think it's a bit of a world first. The issues are immense. It's going to cost the country millions. There are obvious issues for women because in any sort of adaptation process, women are also going to be affected majorly. I was saying to the other group that we've put in a submission on behalf of District 16 to the Climate Adaptation Inquiry. Yes, to think about, to try and encourage them to think about gender issues.
That's wonderful. That is remarkable, but I do know from hearing and reading and listening that making these adaptation efforts is cheaper than fixing it after everything's wiped out.
Yeah.
So that's really important. And I think that's a big reason why we're here today, for learning to have that comfortable conversation with each other so we can have it with more people. So we can do adaptation because anyway. Okay, I have to click a button to close the room. So people are going to start coming in a bit within 30 seconds. So thank you for your comments, Helen. Appreciate it. And it's nice to meet you because I've heard your name a lot, but we haven't met face to face. This is very lovely. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. We're going to go ahead and share our screen again. Here we go. I hope you had some wonderful conversations. We're going to talk about it. So we have 6 rooms. Hopefully our moderators had taken note of the room number. And we're going to talk a little bit, just brief highlights of what you discussed. So here we go. Let me stop the share. Let's go with room 1. Who is the moderator in room 1?
That was me.
Okay.
So,
Hi
so
there.
there's a whole bunch of dinging that going on. One of the biggest things I think we talked about to kind of summarize our very fruitful discussion was the cost. The cost that it is to all of us kind of goes back down to education and education for all. And where we can meet those who where they're at, where we're talking about climate refugees and people that are experiencing disasters, and how we can educate them and help advocate towards building a future that helps kind of create a one that we're not experiencing the impacts of climate change at such threatening levels that they are now, because we talked about all of the disasters that are happening, the lack of access to health, the lack of access to potable drinking water, and that all kind of leads back to that education piece. And one person in our groups brought that they could talk to their mother, but also small children at different levels. So meeting each other where they're at will then kind of help us to address the cost to right now and to future generations. So that's
wonderful. That's wonderful. Sounds like a really rich conversation. Thank you, Daniela. Appreciate that. And everyone in your room. Room 2, who is in room 2 that can speak? Anyone in room 2 that wants to talk about what you knew that you were in room 2? Because sometimes that's not always apparent. Maybe room 3. Who was in room 3? Anybody?
I was.
Okay, Joanne, tell us what you learned.
Okay, our group was great. Each one contributed to it. One of the main things, well, we started with Rhonda, who was talking about how health has become more expensive. The doctors are now going into proactive medicine instead of just reactive. And then we also talked about how Teresa and Stephanie especially talked about food, the cost of food, and the fact that it's not only expensive, but what is less expensive is the unhealthy food. Teresa talked about the fact that people are having difficulty in feeding their families. Some of them are sharing plots, to try to grow foods to make that happen. And what is going to happen to the future if we can't feed them the right foods? What is going to happen to the generations that are coming? Dorothy talked about air quality and staying indoors to try to avoid asthma and all the other conditions you can get from poor air quality. But then there are a lot of people that don't have air conditioning or any means inside that can help them when we're having these horrible heat threats. Melinda talked about, and also Melinda, and I'm trying to think who else, Karen also mentioned that too, about depression of students, the future generation. They're coming home, they're 23 years old, and they're coming home from colleges depressed. They're depressed with what's happening with the environment. They're depressed with what is in their future. They don't know what's in their future. So we talked about that too. Carol talked about the fact that the young are very concerned about the future. And she would say between 80 to 90% of them are really having something. So they are really feeling this. I think overall, we also mentioned the Swiss women, and everyone applauded that the 65-year-old woman first went to the International Court, UN Court, to say that Switzerland was not providing the right kind of environment for them, and they needed to take charge and establish some more climate controls. And they won. They sued the court, and they got that one. So everyone was very proud of that. That's not the older, but that's the older getting ready for the younger. So we thought that was really good too. So overall, I hope I didn't leave anyone out, but I thought everybody was fantastic. They all contributed, and it was really good. We really talked about how we have to take care of poverty, depression, impacts on hearts, impact on everything, make hospitalization easier for other people, etc. Okay,
Thank you, Joanne. Appreciate that. That was a rich conversation as well, talking about so many different factors. So to me, that points out that there are so many things we can talk about when we're talking about climate change and and using empathy and compassion with that. Angela is unmuted. She was in room 2, so we're going to go to Angela.
No, that was Terry was in room 2. Terry's used my logon, so there's 2 Angela Brokmans today.
Okay, Terry, do you want to unmute and give us a brief synopsis of what you learned? I don't know if she's able to unmute. If anyone was in the room with Terry and you have something to say, you can unmute and start chatting. I had a few people in the general session, and we had a great conversation. And once again, it talked about all the different components of what's happening with the heat, and how, like Boonmi was saying, how it's impossible to stay outside. It's so hot, and that her daughter's a gardener and she's not getting as much produce. And so it's going on to the generations, and the food insecurity is what I'm hearing a lot of. That is a reality. And so that is something that we all should be concerned with. All right, I guess we'll go to room 4. Who was in room 4?
That's me.
Okay, Bonnie.
Okay, so we had also great discussions in our group. We started out talking about cleanup costs and how they, what to do after these storms. Sometimes they're devastating, and there's a lot of really expensive infrastructure replacement, power lines and housing, and just, redirecting rivers and things like that. Sometimes the Army and the Navy are called in to help, and those are just tremendous community costs for this. But some of them are quite personal, like people for the first time need to install air conditioning or a heater in their home that they never had before, and those could be tens of thousands of dollars to upgrade your home, or to make your home more flood resistant because it was never built to withstand floods or tornadoes or hurricanes, according to current guidelines. There's more energy in the atmospheres leading to lightning storms and tornadoes and things like that that can be so terrifying and affect children, especially, and they can't control it, and it's very much terrifying to them because they don't know why it's happening or what, they feel helpless to do anything about it. And we think that education and information for the younger generations is really important. And I talked about the wonderful pamphlets available on the Zonta Says Now website that are great resources to start conversations and how to gather the information about community services in your area that you can access in the time of disaster. But there's permanent coastline changes that are happening that affect the future generation. We have some cases, man-made disasters that are making it even worse. So there's lots of government policy that needs to happen, both for us and for future generations. And there's a definite need in policy for sustainable actions and policies that move into the future.
Thank you, Bonnie. Policy is a big one, and we can all advocate for better policy locally, regionally, in your country. That's a really good point. Thank you for explaining what your wonderful group had talked about. It sounds like you had a great conversation. Room 5. Who was in room 5?
We didn't have any USA Caucus member, but I was there, so I took a few notes, and hopefully the group will add things. Let's see. Melanie Portocante started us off talking about the fact that many women don't have access to health insurance. And there is no universal health care in the United States, so that when women suffer climate change issues, they don't necessarily have the money to get the health care they need. and that sometimes the climate disaster causes catastrophic illness with pollutants in the air. Ela was with us and talked about in California, which is, the fruit and vegetable capital of the area. With the climate change, there's been flooding and droughts, and with the flooding, that's brought issues of fungus impacting women's health. And also the fact that the climate is constantly changing means that as immigrant women are being shipped from one place to another. And when they're in a place where they can work because it's not drought, they have to work until it's over, and they don't have time for the self-care that's needed. So that medical practices like hers are, seeing more and more issues due to climate disasters. And then Debbie Field from Canada, I believe, talked about a radio series on overheating, where she heard about a study on women in the ironworking field. And one woman, because of the intensive heat, which is now exacerbated by climate change, but it's already a heat environment, has influenced the menstrual cycle of the women, which is, again, something specific to women, causing an additional health problem. And that also there's more instances because of dehydration of kidney function disorders and more UTIs for women. Again, a women's issue primarily. And then Melanie talked about labor contractors sending young girls and women to clean apartments using chemicals and causing, irreparable damage to their body while they're young and growing. Kathleen Douglas talked about how our everyday life is impacted by what's happening globally, and we don't always feel that impact directly, but we do feel it in our pocketbooks. And it does impact what we can do to take care of our health. Beth Ryan talked about the wildfires in California and the need to economize because of increased costs. And with economizing, she mentioned a particular example where someone was able to buy inexpensive medicine. And then it turned out that medicine was not healthy for them. It was not good. So just trying to economize doesn't always solve the issues. So at any rate, we had a rich conversation. Everybody participated. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you. It sounded like a really rich conversation. It sounded wonderful. And again, more complexities to climate change, which leads me to believe that we can, it becomes overwhelming sometimes when we hear so much, but if there's something that makes us passionate, about the insurance industry or plastic pollution or the food, the migrant women's health, so we can, as Zontians and guests, can find our own path to making a difference. We have one more room left, and then we're going to get back on to our presentation. Who was in room 6?
Eileen, you're muted.
Do you want to talk, Patricia?
No, go for it.
Go
Please.
ahead, Eileen.
Stop moderating. But I just didn't know you were muted.
It's amazing how there's so many different ideas out of these few, 2 questions. I took a few notes. We did start with the idea that arthritis pain is increased in some people due to the high temperature and humidity and the changing from going from air conditioning in your home or your office outdoors and then to your next location. So arthritis pain is an issue. Wildfire smoke is an issue. And these are all coming from different parts of the country. That one was Oregon. Flooding of river channels in Germany. So that obviously is increasing the humidity there as well. And all of these things would bring on the necessity to have air conditioning, which a lot of people in our group don't normally have, and I'm one of them, but people are getting the air conditioning. And that includes in schools. And of course, this is a public expense. There was a comment, very good, from regarding from the energy industry, to meet people where they are. If you're going to have a conversation, it's always good to know your audience when you're having a conversation. So to meet them where they are. And then towards the end of the notes that I took, I mentioned that climate change is causing a cultural shift as well. And when we're talking about young people, they won't know the deep, deep snow like I did, and they won't know the sports that were normally done in the wintertime. And then the comments on the quality of water in Lake Ontario, both the far western end in Hamilton and far eastern end up in Sandy Pond, it's not a good water quality, and even it's not something I grew up with, where you can't go swimming in the lake. Of course it should be clean, but it's not, with the harmful algal blooms. So those were the notes I took. Maybe Patricia had a few more.
Sure, yeah, I think you really did a great job, Eileen. Thank you for highlighting all those. I think I would add that some of the comments that came up as when we were talking about the cost of our health, whilst arthritis was one of the one of the initial things we had talked about, it also came with increased cost of meds. So it was really the physical as well as financial health cost impact there. And then in addition, we saw a lot of spikes, right? So regardless where people were located throughout the globe, it was, summers are getting hotter, sometimes winters are getting less severe. And this was really having an effect on electricity, and then also safety issues where there were fallen trees and spikes in wildfires, air quality, which also impacted asthma. Things like that. As Eileen touched on, floodings were a concern, especially in Europe. And then also one of the things I would add where the cost of future generations, one things that we were seeing that came up in terms of, even when we were talking about in Canada, and I personally have heard this anecdotally from others, that algae is starting to have this really odorous impact, and it's making it complicated for people to even want to enjoy some outdoor activities, water activities, for example, because it's just so, unbearable. And so, and then there were just, a lot of the other kind of basics that everyone else has also talked about in terms of it impacting some, snow, and the fact that this is really triggering some of the seasonal resorts and stuff like that might either be elongated or some of them be shorter. So it's in terms of future generations, it's almost this economical impact too, and causing them a great deal of distress because there's this unknown, this kind of unknown out there. But so it was a really great dialogue with our group as well.
Thank you, both of you, Eileen and Patricia. That was a great dialogue. Sounded wonderful.
So Julie, let me update from the chat line for all the other comments.
Okay, yes, please, because group 2 has some things to say.
Well, yeah. Oh, did Terry get hers off? Her mute off?
No, it's on the chat.
Okay, that's where I was starting. So disease, we also talked about with the climate change is coming new allergies, which then again adds to the medical aspect. Food availability, increased prices, the effect on the tourist industry, the effects of the vibe in areas. One big one that I noticed here was parasites are moving to different areas, and these parasites do not have any predators. So we have new vectors there. Rhonda shared that in the U.S. grocery stores, the fresh food is around the outside of the store. And so if you want to shop the outside ring of the groceries, you'll be healthier and won't have as much processed. Legislation and having the large corporations be responsible for their messaging and not greenwashing, i.e. single-use plastics. They talked a lot about that. Carol brought up that storms, fires, and floods take out roads and railways, and that will disrupt the flow of food and many products. And while we were talking, Madagascar lost their power. And that floods and the climate change are also making it so that people cannot go to work and that many of the streets are unsafe. And let's see, District 4 held a spring workshop focusing on climate change and education about greenwashing. I would love to get the highlights from that from District 4. And then negative consequences facing future generations regarding water shortage in the world is probably of increased conflict and possibly future water wars.
Thank you, Angela. And if any of you want to continue to read through some of the chat comments, it's affecting everyone everywhere. And so the importance is for everyone everywhere to do their part. So let's do ours and let's move on to the rest of our presentation today so you can see where your passions lie. I'm going to go ahead. Terry wasn't able to unmute, so I'll go ahead for you, Terry. I'm sorry to have to take this away from you, but next on our journey, we're going to listen to a video called Talk About It and have a very mini discussion depending on time. So Katharine Hayhoe said the most important thing you can do to fight climate change is talk about it, which is what we're doing today. We've had some beautiful conversations, and some of them, some of the comments and issues are maybe not happy, but they are all serious, and we're all seem to be passionate and empathetic. So let's listen to Katharine Hayhoe. So give me a moment to figure this out so we don't get Johnny Carson back on.
Pundit X is saying, it's cold outside, where's global warming now? And politician Y is saying, for every scientist who says this thing is real, I can find one who says it isn't. So it's a vicious cycle. The planet warms. Scientists release yet another doom-filled report. Politicians push back even more strongly, repeating the same sciencey sounding myths. What can we do to break this vicious cycle? The most important thing to do is, instead of starting up with your head with all the data and facts in our head, to start from the heart. To start by talking about why it matters to us. To begin with genuinely shared values. Are we both parents? Do we live in the same community? Do we enjoy the same outdoor activities? Hiking, biking, fishing, even hunting? Do we care about the economy or national security? The only reason why I care about a changing climate is because of who I already am. I'm a mother, so I care about the future of my child. I live in West Texas, where water is already scarce, and climate change is impacting the availability of that water. I'm a Christian, and I care about a changing climate because it is, as the military calls it, a threat multiplier. It takes those issues, like poverty and hunger and disease and lack of access to clean water, and even political crises that lead to refugee crises. It takes all of these issues and it exacerbates them, it makes them worse. We don't have to be a liberal tree hugger to care about a changing climate. All we have to be is a human living on this planet. Because no matter where we live, climate change is already affecting us today. If we live in the Western North America, we're seeing much greater area being burned by wildfires. If we live in many coastal locations from the Gulf of Mexico to the South Pacific, we are seeing stronger hurricanes, typhoons, and cyclones powered by a warming ocean. If we live in Texas or if we live in Syria, we're seeing climate change supersize our droughts, making them more frequent and more severe. Wherever we live, we're already being affected by a changing climate. So you might say, okay, that's good. We can talk impacts. We can scare the pants off people because this thing is serious. But fear is not what is going to motivate us for the long-term sustained change we need to fix this thing. What we need to fix this thing is rational hope. Yes, we absolutely do need to recognize what's at stake, but we need a vision of a better future. A future with abundant energy, with a stable economy, with resources available to all, where our lives are not worse, but better than they are today. There are solutions, simple solutions that save us money and reduce our carbon footprint at the same time. The bottom line is this: climate change is affecting you and me right here, right now, in the places where we live.
But by working together, we can fix it. Sure, it's a daunting problem. Nobody knows that more than us climate scientists. But we can't give in to despair. We have to go out and actively look for the hope that we need that will inspire us to act. And that hope begins with the conversation today.
That was Katharine Hayhoe. She's a climate scientist. She lives in Texas. We're going to continue with our, I'm going to reshare again so we can go to the next slide.
And that would be me.
That
And
would
so
be
we're now
me.
going to be going into a group discussion. We all know we're capable of having conversations, and we want to share our 4 tips to use to have a rich and resourceful conversation about climate change, climate action, climate justice, and social justice. We want to make sure we listen to understand, that we chat instead of debate. We stick to the facts that we know and be curious and ask questions. So let's practice.
We only have a few minutes to practice because of the time, and we have a few more things to do in our presentation today. So, but if anyone wants to unmute and talk about how you might better have a conversation on women's health and climate change, or any other aspect of climate change, climate justice, social justice. Does anybody want to start? Or raise your hand, or Hasna, please unmute and tell us what you think. You're here. Let me see if I can you unmute?
Yes.
There, welcome.
Thank you very much. Great conversation. But we also need to confront the dangers, life-threatening situation in many parts of the world, including at this moment in South Asia. But what we can do is, yes, we have to give word of hope. We have to bring hope in this picture. And we have to get right kind of education for the young people, right kind of. And pollution is a huge problem. And pollution, then plastic pollution, microplastic pollution, which is not only reaching the land, but also river and the ocean. And I was yesterday in a turtle rescue center in Bangkok, in Phuket. And there are turtles that have digested plastic or have been entangled in the farmers' fishermen's nets, and they have been brought back. And it's a very pathetic thing. These very silent animals are our indicators of our nature, what is happening. So if we can save them and we can save our children, give them the right education and right information for women also to take leadership role in conservation. We don't have to be scientists, but we have to practice what we are preaching.
Thank you, Hasna. I couldn't agree with you more. Does anyone else have a comment or two?
Yeah. Yes, this is Dilruba. I would like
and then
to,
we'll go to Suzanne
yes,
after that.
Yes. What Hasna said, I would like to add to it, that we as teachers must take up advocacy as a subject for climate change in our syllabus for schools, so that these children get to know the effects of climate change, how to combat it, and how to face it, especially the disaster management. And especially girls need to be taught that how their lives are changed with the effects of climate change. Because you see, lower birth rate and pregnancy, they all because of more salinity in the water. So we have to provide fresh drinking water. All these things we create an awareness, and also needs an advocacy. Because Bangladesh has never faced this kind of floods as we have this time. all our buildings nearly were half underwater and everything was destructed. So we have to be prepared for such, situations in the future, and our children must be given hope. Hope is something that they have to believe in us, that and see something tangible has to be done to make them feel that things are being done. Either the government does it, and it's not only the government's headache, it should be every citizens, every organization should come forward and make climate change #1 agenda in their topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Dilruba. And Suzanne, what did you want to add to that?
I think that climate conversations are actually one of the most effective things that women can do. I think we're natural listeners. I think that one of the problems that we often suffer from in the world is that men don't really listen often, not every man, but as a general rule, they find it harder to listen. They feel more threatened if they're not in charge of the information, whereas we're kind of a bit more used often to teaching and listening and bringing people with us in terms of talking. So I think it's actually a really important area for women. And sometimes I think people think of it as something fairly light to do, but in fact, it's doing quite a lot of the heavy lifting.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So we have advantages as women. We're good listeners. We can gather our friends and neighbors and community to do more advocacy. I think that's really important. We have time for one more comment and then we have to move forward. We're running out of time.
Can I make a very short comment?
Yes.
I think we also need to remember, at least I need to remember, that our children don't necessarily actually have no way of knowing what it used to be like. I see that with my own kids, like, oh, the shoreline used to be out there, or, oh, the snow used to be deeper. So when we talk about climate change, to a young person, they won't see the change. They just know, oh, the beach is here now. It's not, 200 feet over there. So just a point.
That's a very good point and this is the same with violence and everything else is what you're living in becomes your norm, and it has to get worse for you to think it's worse. And so for us as elders to future generations, it's important for us to express that this is worse and this is not okay, so thank you. We're going to move on. Let me share my screen to the Zonta Says Now art gallery. Angela, did you want to read this?
No, I was just going to say up next is we want to share with you the journey on the Zonta Says Now virtual art gallery and make you aware how we can hopefully get a represented art gallery presentation from every district. Julie, please share this with us.
Thank you. So we're going to go, it's a smaller screen, but we're going to go ahead and watch this. It's our promo video, but the submission time is open. You can, if you're a Zontian in the Z Club, Golden Z member, supportive Zontian status, or a former Zontian, you can submit. Zontians who have a spouse, grandparent, or child can also submit their art. We had that in our 2024 season. Launch day is Earth Day, April 22nd, 2025. And this is a beautiful way for Zontians and the people close to express themselves about climate change if this is the way that that's their love language, is through art. It really speaks to people and really helps them understand. It's also an educational thing. So let's watch the promo video. thank you for watching that. It is a beautiful way to express yourself if you want to submit. If somebody on our team can put the web link to the art gallery in the chat, and that way you can get your 2025 submission form and everything submitted. It explains everything on the submission form. So thank you. And I'm going to throw this to Eileen.
Thank you. Those are such beautiful pictures. Okay. So what's next with Zonta Says Now? Let's summarize where we are. We've listened and learned so much today: how climate change affects the health of women and girls, how to avoid the rabbit hole in conversations, and what the pillars of climate justice are, and where do Zontians fit in this mix. At Zonta International, we are committed to building a better world for women and girls. We say yes to gender equity. We say no to violence against women. And we say now to climate justice. Our mission tells us that we recognize women's rights as human rights, and we work so that every woman and every girl is able to achieve her full potential through our advocacy, education, and our service projects around the world. In such a world, no woman lives in fear of violence. Zonta Says Now is an international campaign based on Zonta's statement on climate change. This position paper contains the following recommendations. We call on governments to meet their obligation under the UN Paris Agreement on Climate Change. And I'll be slightly off script in saying this, but that's okay. This is a commitment by most of the nations of the world to keep global warming below 2 degrees centigrade or Celsius. And that would be 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit. And we aren't really doing a very good job at that. But anyway, that's the UN Paris Agreement. We also call on governments to educate girls and encourage them to take up science, technology, engineering, and math careers, and to be part of the global response to climate change. We call on governments to involve more women in decision-making so that we have gender balance in governing bodies, and to enable equal economic opportunities by addressing gender gaps in childcare, elder care, pay, anything that's a barrier to women participating fully in the economy, and to include women in disaster planning so their multiple needs are met. To achieve that, we call on our Zonta members to increase their own awareness of climate justice, to advocate for gendered climate actions to support women in decision-making roles on environmental sustainability, to promote girls' education, climate literacy, and promote women in STEM occupations, and to advocate for policies that ensure women's full participation in the economy. Last year, we focused on disaster preparedness and on raising members' awareness of climate justice. Now our focus, I think we mentioned this already, but now our focus is on enabling women's full participation in the economy. So over to you, Patricia.
Thank you, Eileen.
Yep.
So what are our tools? We have Zonta Says Now web pages where our knowledge is collected and stored. Our monthly Intercontinental think tank is where we share our passion and learnings and are inspired by our speakers from around the world. We use a 5-step framework for action. And we have a virtual art gallery, which you saw, where Zontians can express how they feel about gender equality and climate justice through their artwork. Next. We continue to develop fact sheets, leaflets, action guides, and other resources to help with having the conversation. All are available electronically. Over to you, Joanne.
Thanks, Patricia. Zonta Says Now seeks climate justice for women and girls. We want women to be able to prevent, to prepare, to respond, and to recover from the impacts of climate change on at least the same basis as men. We do this by taking gender equal climate action locally, nationally, and internationally. If you would like to find out more about Zonta or would like to get in contact, please come to the zonta.org website, click on causes, and click on Zonta Says Now. Save the date for our